Chapter 49. Once Harry was finally alone in the corridor, far from the defense classroom, he allowed himself a quiet chuckle. The detention had been frustrating, but he'd faced worse, and he privately thought he had handled it quite well. Sitting there and accepting her ministry propaganda hadn't even been an option for him. He hadn't said anything about fighting Voldemort or made any outlandish claims. He had simply pointed out the facts and the inconsistencies in her own logic. Remus would be proud. Ignoring Peeves, who was juggling inkwells and singing about his sanity, or lack thereof, Harry strolled calmly up to the Transfiguration Professor's office and knocked on the door. After a few moments, McGonagall opened it, staring down at him in bewilderment. "Potter, shouldn't you be in class?" "I've been sent to see you," he informed her. Her eyebrows rose. "Sent?" Harry held up the pink roll of parchment as an explanation. The Gryffindor house mistress's lips thinned. "Come in, then." Taking the scroll, she unsealed it with a tap of her wand, absently gesturing for Harry to take the chair opposite her desk while she read. Eventually, she looked up at him, her expression unreadable. "Is this true?" "I wouldn't know, Professor. I don't know what it says." "Is it true that you shouted at Professor Umbridge?" "Well, I wouldn't say shouted," Harry replied. "Raised my voice, perhaps." McGonagall didn't look impressed. "You disrespected her and the minister?" "I suppose." "You called her a liar?" "Not in so many words." "You insisted that he who must not be named killed Mr. Diggory last year?" "I pointed out that if he didn't, then the Triwizard tournament, which Minister Fudge was responsible for, was at fault, and she was welcome to choose who to blame." McGonagall stared at him for a long moment, quietly despairing. Then she, "Have a biscuit, Potter," McGonagall said with a sigh. Harry blinked as a tartan biscuit tin floated toward him. What was happening? McGonagall simply stared until he finally selected a ginger newt and took a bite. "It's the first day of term, Potter. You need to be more careful." Harry swallowed, surprised. This wasn't the scolding he had expected. She actually sounded anxious. "I never explicitly said that Voldemort had returned," he explained. "I mentioned that a Death Eater killed Cedric, and she was welcome to draw her own conclusions. Oh, and I sort of blamed the Ministry for what happened to my cousin." McGonagall's lips pursed. "My condolences," she murmured, and he nodded. He figured he would be hearing a lot of that now. The story would spread throughout the school by dinner. But that doesn't excuse this kind of behavior. Acting out in Dolores Umbridge's class could cost you much more than house points and a detention." "I know," Harry agreed, "but I understand what she's here for. I know what she's trying to do." McGonagall studied him carefully. "Yes, I think you do," she said quietly. "I suppose it would be too much to ask you to keep your head down in her classes." Harry couldn't help but grin. "Professor, no offense, but when have you ever known me to keep my head down?" The despairing look returned, and he chuckled. "If she's focused on me, she's distracted from everyone else." Let McGonagall think he was talking about Dumbledore and the Order. In truth, he couldn't care less about them. If Umbridge was busy playing word games with him, trying to get him to incriminate himself as a liar and a lunatic, then she wouldn't have time to pay attention to Susan and the rest, who were gearing up to take Fudge down as soon as they all came of age. The more he could get the Ministry puppet to deny Voldemort's return, the better. It will limit my future too much. It would be easier to unseat Fudge and his entire useless regime when the Dark Lord finally reveals himself, Harry thought. You're just a student, Potter. It's not your responsibility to protect everyone else. McGonagall's voice was tinged with concern, and Harry offered her what he hoped was a reassuring smile. He had no idea how much she knew about Dumbledore's interference, but the fact that she disapproved of him sacrificing himself for the cause was a good sign. Merlin, he hoped she wasn't in cahoots with the headmaster. The school needed her far too much. I'll be all right, Professor. It's just a detention. Actually, according to this note, it's detention every evening this week, she corrected him with a slight frown. Harry muttered a curse under his breath. Language, Potter, came the automatic reprimand. Sorry, Professor, but every evening this week, that's outrageous. Then a thought struck him and he laughed. Oh, that's brilliant. I beg your pardon, Potter? McGonagall regarded him with a look that suggested the rumours about his sanity might not be entirely unfounded. Harry grinned at her. A whole week of detention just for pointing out some facts. That's going to make her look really in control, isn't it? If Umbridge had dismissed him outright, given him just one detention, it would have shown that his words didn't matter to her. But a whole week? Everyone would see that he had struck a nerve. She thought she was making an example of him, but really, she was only making one of herself. There was a flicker in the Transfiguration Professor's eyes, something like pride if Harry looked closely. Be careful, Potter, she warned again. Dolores Umbridge has friends in some powerful places, and you cannot afford to have your future limited so young. Oh, don't worry about me, Professor, he replied cheerfully. I'm planning to play professional Quidditch after graduation. I don't think... The Ministry has no say in that, Harry said. McGonagall stared at him, her lips twitching as if she were trying very hard not to laugh. Then I'd best make sure that trophy stays on my shelf this year, she replied, glancing at the Quidditch cup still proudly displayed from Harry's third year. He beamed back at her. I'll do my best. As expected, word of Harry's clash with Umbridge spread quickly during dinner. While some people took it as confirmation that he'd lost his mind, most seemed entertained by Harry's bold and unapologetic challenge to the Ministry. This was especially true after it was confirmed that a Dementor had indeed kissed a Muggle teenage boy in the middle of Surrey, and the Ministry had covered it up. Umbridge looked furious. I can't believe you, Neville declared, shaking his head. No, I can actually believe it. That's the worst part. Harry grinned smugly, feeling quite pleased with himself. All I did was point out that there seemed to have been a lot of tragic accidents under the Ministry's watch, he shrugged. Not my fault she got upset about it. You're going to be in detention for the entire year, Neville said in despair. Nah. Harry wasn't bothered. Not with Umbridge, at least. Snape will miss me cleaning his cauldrons. Neville let out a moan of dismay, and Harry chuckled. Across the hall, he spotted Luna entering the room and waved her over, gesturing to the empty seat beside him. To his surprise, she brought Sullivan Fawley with her. Hello, Harry, Luna greeted airily. I hear you've had quite an exciting first day back. Don't encourage him, Neville groaned, and Sully snorted. Did she really say you weren't going to use magic the entire year? In your owl year? He asked, sounding offended by the very idea. Harry nodded. Apparently, if we know the theory well enough, we'll be able to perform the spells perfectly on our first try, during our exams, while being graded on our performance. He rolled his eyes, and the Ravenclaw boy grimaced. What a load of nonsense. Merlin, we've had some truly interesting defense professors over the years, but I think this might be the first one to cause an entire year group to fail both their owls and newts. Harry thought that was exactly what Fudge was aiming for. Sometimes he wondered if the Minister was in league with Voldemort himself. Surely he couldn't just be that incompetent. Wait. people actually pass their exams when Lockhart was teaching?" Neville asked incredulously. Harry echoed his surprise. "Professor Umbridge never said we couldn't use the spells outside of class," Luna remarked, absently spooning soup into a hollowed-out bread roll. "Only that they weren't permitted inside the classroom." "Looks like we know what most study groups will be focusing on then," Harry agreed, wondering how many people would get kicked out of the library for using magic near the books. Not everyone was willing to sneak into abandoned classrooms after curfew. "That'll keep Madame Pomfrey busy," said Neville, shaking his head. As Sully asked Neville a question about herbology, Harry tuned out of the conversation, trying to catch snippets of whispers that included his name, echoing throughout the great hall. It felt ambitious to try convincing everyone that Voldemort was back when the Ministry and the Prophet were doing their best to shut down even the slightest suggestion that such a thing could be possible, and when Voldemort himself was being so frustratingly silent. They would find out eventually, when the Dark Lord made his first move. The more immediate problem was discrediting the Ministry without sending everyone straight into Dumbledore's arms. Harry didn't want people to see it as supporting one side or the other. He just wanted them to think for themselves and start questioning the information they were being fed so blindly. Harry knew he had to be prepared to fight if the situation called for it. There were far too many puppet masters pulling strings, and his best bet was to cut every single one he could. The teachers were determined to make it clear from the very start that they were all gearing up for their owl examinations. After just one day of classes, Harry and his classmates found themselves facing a mountain of homework. After dinner, Harry and Neville headed up to the common room to tackle their assignments. With so many people still gossiping about Dudley, Harry wanted to avoid the library and the challenge of finding an inter-house study group. Hermione had already claimed the comfortable chairs by the fire, with Ron sitting beside her. So, Harry and Neville settled on the opposite side of the common room. Nearby, Fred and George were busy handing out sweets to a group of first and second years, clipboards in hand and grinning widely. One by one, the first years slumped unconscious, safely caught by the cushioning charms the twins had expertly layered. Harry nudged Neville to get his attention, just as Hermione stormed over, fury blazing in her eyes. They watched, amused, as the fifth-year prefect confronted the twins, who remained completely unfazed, continuing their experiment. The first years seemed fine once Lee had given them the other half of the fainting fancies, but that didn't calm Hermione down at all. "Are you going to put us in detention?" George challenged, a cocky grin on his face. Hermione squared her shoulders and narrowed her eyes at him. "I'll write to your mother," she shot back, and a low "ooh" rippled through the common room. "Low blow," Neville murmured, wincing at the reaction. The twins looked horrified at the mere thought of it. "That won't stop them, though," Harry said knowingly. "They'll just get sneakier about it." Fred and George Weasley were not going to be deterred by a single prefect, especially when they were so close to achieving their dreams. After that, the noise in the common room continued to swell. The noise in the common room was ramping up, starting to nag at Harry's headache. He glanced around and discreetly raised a privacy ward around them, one that would dampen the sound. Neville let out a small sigh of relief. "Thanks, Harry," he said. "No problem," Harry replied. They worked in silence for a few more minutes, until Neville cleared his throat. "So, how was your summer, really? Other than, you know." He waved his hand, as if to encompass the Dementor attack, Ron and Hermione's pestering, and Harry's total lack of privacy in one single gesture. "I know there's stuff you wouldn't tell Ginny or anyone. Not that you have to tell me," Neville added quickly. No, I was going to anyway. It was actually really nice, up until everything went to shambles. I was somewhere safe at first, with Sirius and Remus. They started teaching me how to duel properly. Neville didn't know about Snape, and Harry preferred to keep it that way. The blonde boy grew serious. "You're getting ready to fight him, then?" Harry nodded. "I have to. Sooner the better, right?" He couldn't mention Horcruxes either, but he could share some of what he'd learned. "Draco came to visit for my birthday too," he added, a smile tugging at his lips. Neville's eyes lit up. "Oh, did he now?" he drawled. "How nice of him." Harry elbowed him in the side, ducking his face to hide his blush. Neville laughed. "Have you seen him yet? You know, properly." Harry shook his head sadly. "No, and all my new detentions won't make that any easier." With any luck, Umbridge would only keep him for an hour or two, and he'd still have the night free to meet Draco without falling too far behind on his homework. But Harry doubted it. "If you need me to cover for you, just say the word," Neville offered. Harry felt a warmth in his chest. Neville truly was an excellent friend to have. Flitwick and McGonagall shared a common approach this term. They were determined to keep their students busy with an overwhelming amount of work. Each class began with a 15-minute lecture on the importance of owls and just how challenging they were going to be. Harry couldn't help but wonder if this was truly the case, or if all the Hogwarts teachers had collectively decided that the best way to prepare their students was to over-prepare them. It seemed more likely that they were trying to set expectations for exams that might not be as tough as they implied. This method felt like a recipe for student anxiety, but perhaps building mental resilience was part of the plan. Harry was uncertain. Regardless, he was already concerned about finding time for his extracurricular activities on top of his regular schoolwork, especially if Umbridge kept him in detention as often as she seemed to desire. Watching Hermione frantically adjust her revision schedule after each class was quite entertaining. She quickly realized just how much time she would need to allocate to homework, sacrificing her own study plans. Harry continued his small acts of rebellion against house divisions in class, sitting with Anthony in Transfiguration and Susan in Charms. It was easier to mix houses in classes that didn't include Slytherins. It pained Harry to see how withdrawn the Slytherin house had become, and he hoped the younger students wouldn't face such pressure to choose sides. They were far too young for that kind of division. At lunch, Harry found himself once again at the Ravenclaw table, this time sitting with Cho. "I wanted to thank you again for writing to me over the summer," she said quietly, offering a shy smile. "It's been hard without Cedric. I'm really glad I still have friends like you and the Hufflepuff boys." From what Harry could see, Cedric's old roommates had taken Cho under their wing, which made sense since she had spent so much time with them before, thanks to Cedric. "Of course, I'm glad we're friends too. Last year was fun, even with all the parts that weren't." Harry paused, looking at her with concern. "Are you doing okay?" He couldn't imagine what it must be like for her, returning to school with everyone whispering about Cedric's death and being surrounded by memories of her boyfriend. The smile she gave him seemed strained. "I'm getting there. Like I said, it's been hard, but it'll get easier," she replied. Harry wrapped an arm around her shoulders and gave her a quick squeeze. "I'm always here if you need me," he promised. "Honestly, just knowing the truth about what happened was a big relief," she confessed. "If I'd been left with just that vague stuff Dumbledore said last year, I don't know how I would be feeling." She sniffled a little. "I just wish everyone else would believe what you say too. Patrick and the boys do when I told them, not the details, just how he died," she added quickly. Harry was relieved she hadn't shared the entire story with them. But all those people who believe the prophet, it's like they're just laughing at Cedric's death, you know, saying it was an accident or part of the tournament, like he wasn't good enough to make it to that cup. As she spoke, she glared pointedly up at Umbridge. Harry wondered if Cho had had a defense against the dark arts lesson yet. As far as I'm concerned, Cedric Diggory won the Triwizard Tournament, Harry declared firmly. I wouldn't have been at the cup if it weren't for him. Of course, Crouch had rigged the whole maze in his favour, but that was beside the point. They'll see the truth one day. Voldemort won't stay quiet forever. Cho's smile turned into a grim line. We'll be ready when he does. Her eyes were fierce, and Harry believed her, even if he hoped none of them would need to join that fight. During care of magical creatures, it was tempting to ask. Harry wondered when Grubbly Plank would be stepping in for Hagrid. If he was truly out on a mission for the Order, either she didn't know, or she did but wouldn't share it with him. Instead, Harry focused on studying his Bowtruckle, feeling a mix of guilt and enjoyment from the calm, informative lesson. Hagrid was great, but his classes were always a bit chaotic. He could have done without Draco and Pansy muttering cutting remarks about the half-giant under their breath. However, most of Harry's irritation in response was feigned. They were simply living up to expectations, just as he was. If he took some satisfaction in watching Draco get into such an argument with Ron that he ended up hexing him, well, that was a secret he could keep to himself. Half of the Slytherins didn't seem to know how to handle the other two-thirds of the Golden Trio. They were caught between wanting to belittle the Gryffindors and their real or imagined animosity toward Harry. When they saw Harry equally annoyed with Ron and Hermione, it seemed to take some of the fun out of their taunts. Gradually, they began to direct their sneers at Neville instead. At least, those who were bold enough to risk insulting the Longbottom heir did. The more arrogant among them were confident in Voldemort's victory, believing the Longbottom name wouldn't hold any weight in a year or two. As dinner time dwindled, Harry hurriedly wolfed down his food, trying not to overdo it, when Angelina dropped onto the bench beside him. "What's this I hear about you having detention at 5 on Friday?" she asked flatly, anger evident in her tone. "All week," he confirmed. "Umbridge." Angelina scowled. "Harry, I told you I wanted the whole team at Keeper Tryouts." Harry cursed under his breath. He had completely forgotten about those. "I'm sorry, Angie. If I thought she'd let me reschedule, I'd ask." He knew Umbridge would likely be delighted to keep him from the tryouts. Harry couldn't believe he was missing out on Quidditch because of her. "I'm half tempted to make you ask anyway," the chaser muttered, glaring at the table. But then her fight seemed to fade, her shoulders slumping. "I know some things are bigger than Quidditch, Harry. I've talked to Fred about it." Harry couldn't help but wonder what Fred had shared with her. "But please, for me, try not to get any more detentions. Quidditch this year is really important. It's my last chance, our last chance. We can't win the cup with our star seeker stuck in detention every single night." "I'll try my best," he promised, though he knew it was largely out of his hands. "And I promise I'll get along nicely with whoever you pick as keeper." As the seeker, he didn't have to mesh as closely with the rest of the team, but he understood Angelina's desire for a strong bond among them all. It would be tough to replace Oliver. "Good. Now get moving. It's almost 5, and if you're late, she might give you even more detentions." Harry glanced at his watch, swore under his breath, and jumped to his feet, a bread roll still in hand, as he sprinted for the doors. Thanks to a couple of marauder shortcuts, he made it to Umbridge's office just in the nick of time. When the door opened, he blinked, his eyes taking a moment to adjust to the overwhelming pinkness of it all. The walls were adorned with dainty porcelain plates, each one decorated with various cats wearing bows and looking adorably sprawled out. As Harry stepped inside, it felt as though 100 sets of eyes were watching him, sending a shiver down his spine. At the desk, Umbridge stood with her overly sweet smile firmly in place. "Good evening, Mr. Potter," she said, staring him down until he responded in kind. "Please, sit." There was a single desk opposite hers, with a blank piece of parchment resting on the surface. Harry took a seat, watching her expectantly. "You're going to be writing lines for me this evening with a rather special quill of mine," she added, just as he reached for his own. He watched as she retrieved a jet-black quill with a dangerously sharp nib, placing it on the desk in front of him. "May I have some ink, please, Professor?" he asked calmly. For some reason, that made her giggle. "Oh, you won't be needing any ink," she replied, smiling. "I want you to write, 'I must not tell lies.'" Harry almost asked her to clarify the lies he was supposedly telling, but he recognized that now wasn't the time for sarcasm. After all, he had just promised Angelina he wouldn't get into any more detentions. "How many times?" he asked instead, his mind already drifting to the mountain of homework waiting for him. "As long as it takes for the message to sink in," Umbridge said, giggling once more. Harry scrunched up his nose in confusion, but shrugged and began to write. His breath caught in his throat as a sharp pain shot through the back of his right hand. The words he wrote on the paper, appearing in shiny, dark red ink, also carved themselves into his skin. They healed almost immediately, leaving nothing more than a slight red patch, but it was enough to make him wince. Umbridge watched him from behind her desk, her hands clasped, looking entirely too pleased with herself. Harry lowered his head and kept writing. He had heard about these quills, blood quills, Bill had called them, when he explained how magically binding contracts were signed. They were used to sign in blood to prove a person's identity. They weren't meant for repetitive use. The pain intensified with every line, every time the words reopened and healed on the back of his hand. But he didn't flinch, didn't shake, and didn't slow down for even a moment, acting as if he was writing with an ordinary quill. If Umbridge thought pain was the way to control him, she had another thing coming. This was nothing compared to what he had endured growing up. After 10 years and 1.5 summers with the Dursleys, Harry had become an expert at ignoring pain to get things done. Harry began to tune out the relentless burn and sting of the quill cutting into his flesh. Instead, he mentally composed his herbology essay while he wrote the simple lines. It was interesting, the words Umbridge had chosen for him. He had expected her to be more upset about his blatant disregard for the Ministry's authority. After all, he hadn't even talked that much about Voldemort in class. Fudge had definitely sent her to keep an eye on him, to try and silence him and force him to conform to the Ministry's party line. Good luck to them. An hour passed, then 2. The sky outside the window turned pitch black. Still, Harry showed no reaction to the pain. He simply turned over his parchment to write on the other side when he ran out of room. As he wrote, he meditated, wondering when he would next have free time to practice his animagus transformation. At this rate, it seemed unlikely. At last, Umbridge cleared her throat. "Come here, Mr. Potter." Harry approached her, holding out his hand for inspection. The skin had healed over, but it was red and tender, like a bad sunburn. Umbridge pressed her fingers against it and looked annoyed when Harry didn't so much as twitch. Really, she would have to do better than that. With a snide remark about how the message would sink in more during tomorrow's detention, Umbridge didn't stop Harry when he stuffed the sheet of parchment into his bag and left the office. He didn't know much about blood magic, but he knew enough not to leave his own blood lying around in the enemy's grasp. Pausing in a hidden passageway on the way up to Gryffindor Tower, Harry murmured a healing charm over the back of his hand, sighing quietly in relief as the redness began to fade. By the time he reached the common room, it was practically gone. There he found Neville and Ginny still awake, sitting at the table by the slowly dying fire. "You guys didn't have to wait up," Harry said. "It's already midnight," Harry thought, wincing at the memory of Umbridge forcing him to write lines for nearly 7 hours. "Had homework to do. Figured we might as well." "How was it?" Neville asked, shifting his books to make room on the table as Harry rummaged through his school bag for his herbology textbook. He desperately needed sleep, but he could at least jot down the notes he had mentally composed during detention. "Just lines," he replied, trying to sound casual, though he could feel the tightness of his smile. He wished Draco still had the other half of the two-way mirror, or that he had managed to pass it back to Sirius by now. He would give anything to sit and talk with either of them. Even if he couldn't share the details about the Blood Quill, he craved that sense of reassurance and comfort. But both mirrors remained tucked away in his trunk, and he faced an overwhelming amount of homework before he could even consider relaxing. "That's not so bad then," Ginny said, smiling at him. "A week of lines and a few late nights doing homework, not the end of the world." "Yeah," Harry agreed, though his hand throbbed, and he knew it would feel 1,000 times worse after a week of evenings like this. Still, he could handle it. He'd been through worse. Chapter 50. With every teacher doing their best to overwhelm the fifth years with work, it was no surprise that the heirs were struggling to find time to meet. The next morning, Susan caught Harry in the corridor on his way to divination and quickly raised a privacy ward. "We need to have a study group," she told him. He grimaced. "I'd love to, but I've got detention with Umbridge every night this week." Susan swore, her gaze sympathetic. "Go ahead and meet without me, though. Neville can catch me up. I'll give him my notes for you, too." "That'll work. I'd imagine you already know what I'm going to say about Umbridge anyway." Harry smiled wryly. "I think I've got the gist of it. We just need to make sure she doesn't catch wind of what we're up to. The last thing we need is Fudge getting enough forewarning to try and wriggle his way out of consequences." Sometimes it was utterly galling to think about how long it would take for all of them to turn 17 and be in a position to implement their plans. How long Fudge and his cronies, along with Dumbledore and his kind, could continue ruining lives for their own gain. "It's going to be a tough year," Susan agreed, looking grim. "I'll do what I can. I make a rather excellent scapegoat," Harry said with a wink which made her giggle. "Always happy to talk about Voldemort a bit more, if it'll get her off your case." "Good to know." She seemed amused. "Aunt Amelia believes you, by the way. She's trying to do what she can to prepare the ministry, but they're all sticking their heads in the sand." "I figured as much. If it would help, I caught the names of some of the Death Eaters who were there that night. She might not be able to arrest them, but at least she can keep an eye out." Susan nodded eagerly, and Harry made a mental note to write down the names for her later and slip them in with the law notes. "Listen, Susan, I know things are all kinds of chaotic with the owls, Umbridge and everything else. We need to ensure the wider study group keeps going. You heard the Sorting Hat. Now, more than ever, we have to break down those house boundaries." Harry didn't want fear to push everyone back into old habits. "Don't worry, we've got it covered," Susan assured him. "We'll especially need it for defense. Merlin," she added with a shudder. "Just get through your detentions, all right? Leave the Unity to me." She shot him a confident grin and then glanced down the corridor. "I've got to get to arithmancy. I'll see you later." She dropped the privacy ward and hurried away, just as a crowd of students spilled into the hallway. Harry set off toward divination at a half-jog, his mind brimming with all the information and secrets he was trying to keep organized. After his detention, if he could finish his homework in a reasonable time, he planned to sit up with his password-protected notebook and try to sort out his thoughts. With Umbridge looming over him and Voldemort waiting in the shadows, Harry knew he needed a plan. He had herbology first thing after lunch, which meant Neville went down to the greenhouses as soon as he'd eaten, eager to spend some time talking with Professor Sprout before class started. Harry wasn't too keen on joining him, so he finished his lunch alone and then settled in a quiet corridor to work on his potions essay, fully aware it was the toughest piece of homework on his list. As he finally made his way toward herbology, a pale hand reached out from behind a tapestry and yanked him into a hidden alcove. Harry almost melted with relief. He immediately pulled Draco close, leaning back against the wall and drawing the blonde into a long, slow kiss. Draco pressed him against the stone, fingers cupping Harry's jaw. When they finally parted, Harry took what felt like the first proper breath he'd had in weeks. "Hi," he greeted, smiling softly. "I've got a bone to pick with you," Draco murmured, though there was no heat in his voice. "What do you think you're doing, getting a week's worth of detention?" "You were there," Harry pointed out, absently fiddling with the knot of Draco's Slytherin tie. "I couldn't help myself." "I saw that." Draco smirked, and Harry felt an odd sense of pride swelling in his chest. "You were certainly entertaining, knocking her down a few pegs like that, but I do question your judgment in making enemies so early in the year." "She had it out for me before I even stepped into her classroom," Harry replied, his fingers trailing up Draco's pale neck and into the soft, short hair behind his ear. "We both know why she's here. I bet she'd give me detention for breathing at this rate. I might as well earn it." "Don't push it," Draco warned, even as he leaned into Harry's touch. "It's going to be difficult enough to find time with you while she's around, let alone with you in detention every evening. I swear, if this level of homework keeps up all year, my brain will melt out of my ears before I even get to my exams." "It's the worst, isn't it?" Harry agreed. "We'll find some time to sneak away this weekend, I promise. Then we can compare schedules and make plans." They probably wouldn't get to see each other in private as much as they had the year before, but Harry would take any moments with Draco he could manage. "Sounds good," Draco replied, taking Harry's hand in his. Harry wasn't quick enough to hide his flinch. "What's the matter?" "Nothing." "You're a terrible liar, Potter," Draco shot back immediately. "To me, anyway." "What's wrong with your hand?" He lit the tip of his wand, holding Harry's hand up to examine it. "Why is it all red?" Reluctantly, Harry explained about the Blood Quill. By the end of his explanation, Draco was flushed with anger. Draco muttered, "No wonder my father likes her so much." He carefully turned Harry's hand over in his, bringing it up to his lips and pressing the softest, tender kiss to the inflamed flesh. Harry's heart skipped a beat at the gesture, his ears turning pink. "It's fine, really," he insisted. But Draco placed another gentle kiss on his hand. "Go to Uncle Severus after your detention," he urged. "If I heal it up, Umbridge will just make me do more lines." She wanted her message to leave a permanent mark. Draco fixed Harry with a steady gaze. "That's what glamours are for, idiot," he pointed out lightly. "Go to Severus and see what he can do. Blood Quills are dark magic. You don't want to mess with overexposure to one." The concern in Draco's voice tugged at Harry's heart until he sighed and leaned into Draco's embrace. "Fine," he relented. "I'll go tonight." He hoped to avoid the potions professor finding out. If Snape knew, that meant Remus would know, and that meant Sirius would know, which would lead to chaos. "Good boy." Draco kissed him with satisfaction. "I have to go to class, and so do you." Harry let out a quiet whine at the thought of leaving the darkened alcove, but after one more lingering kiss and the promise of a proper meet-up once Harry was done with detention, they parted ways, taking care to avoid being seen. That brief rendezvous was exactly what Harry needed to help him get through the day, right up until his second detention. If Umbridge was expecting some kind of reaction or pain response this time, she was sorely disappointed. The words bloomed on Harry's flesh just as easily as they had the night before, though the pain was already worse. Once again, he didn't even flinch. His mind was focused on his divination homework, conjuring up a dream he could write in his diary that had nothing to do with the graveyard or that mysterious... The corridor was thick with tension as Umbridge's barely concealed fury flickered in her eyes. At the end of the detention, Harry remained surprisingly calm, allowing her to examine his hand while she pressed down on the still healing cut. She was nothing compared to Vernon Dursley. With a polite good night, Harry gathered up his bloodied parchment and left the office. As soon as he was out of sight, he draped the invisibility cloak over his shoulders and made his way to Snape's personal chambers. The door opened almost instantly, making Harry wonder if Draco had mentioned something. "What are you doing out this late?" Snape asked, once they were safely inside and the door was closed. Harry dropped the cloak and offered an apologetic smile. "I just finished detention." One of Snape's eyebrows lifted in disapproval. "So long past curfew. Tut tut, Dolores." "Yeah, so don't expect my Moonstone essay to be amazing. I wrote it during lunch today." A brief smirk crossed Snape's lips. "I'm sure I will delight in finding the flaws," he drawled, before scrutinizing Harry once more. "You didn't come here just to apologize for the state of your homework." Harry dropped his gaze, suddenly hesitant, but he had made a promise. I told Draco I'd come show you." Snape looked at him, waiting. "Umbridge is making me write lines with a blood quill." He thrust out his hand, revealing the faint outline of "I must not tell lies" that was still struggling to heal. A low curse slipped from Snape's lips. "Your detention start at what time?" "5, Harry replied, wincing at the furious look on the man's face. "The pain doesn't bother me, but she's going to keep at it until the message sinks in," she says. "And, well, I don't really want to walk around dripping blood all the time if I can help it. Even I never forced you through a bloody 7-hour detention, let alone... She wants you to mutilate yourself. The nerve of that woman. This is not a legal use of blood quills." "What can we do? Report her to the ministry?" Harry replied, his tone laced with sarcasm. Snape's thin lips twisted in response. With Fudge and Dumbledore in the mix, there was no safe authority to turn to. Besides, drawing attention to the castle was the last thing Harry wanted to deal with at the moment. "It's fine, really," he insisted. "I've had loads worse, and it's actually funny watching how angry she gets that I'm not visibly in pain. I'm only telling you because Draco made me." "As he should," Snape agreed firmly. "Stay there." He vanished into his private lab and returned a minute later, holding a bottle of something yellow and a pad of white gauze. "This is essence of dittany. It'll speed up the healing." Snape reached for Harry's hand, but Harry pulled back. "Shouldn't I wait until all the detentions are over?" he asked. The worse it looked by the end of the week, the more likely Umbridge would let him go. Snape scowled at him. "I thought you didn't want to bleed everywhere." "Yeah, I was hoping you might have a charm that would, heal it just enough to scab over. At the end of the week, I can use that dittany stuff and put a glamour on it so Umbridge thinks it's scarred." It didn't seem like a big deal. Still, Snape's lips pursed. "Remus would kill me if I let you walk out of here with a wound like that," he said flatly, though he didn't make a move to grab Harry's hand. They exchanged a brief stare before Snape pinched the bridge of his nose in frustration. "Salazar saved me from stubborn, idiot Gryffindors. Give me your hand." "No dittany?" Harry checked warily, extending his hand only after Snape nodded. He waved his wand over Harry's skin, murmuring 2 spells in quick succession. "The first should stop the bleeding," Snape explained, watching as the cut quickly began to mend. The wound had scabbed over, but hadn't healed any further. "The second spell is one you'll need to learn. It removes the build-up of magic from the connection to the quill." Harry's nose wrinkled in confusion. "Blood quills are used for binding contracts. Prolonged use can, in some cases, have the same effect as a magical vow." The colour drained from Harry's face. "You mean it could make it impossible for me to lie?" "Not impossible, but uncomfortable. Misdirection and avoiding the truth will be fine, which, luckily, is more your usual method anyway, but outright lies will trigger the magic. With those 2 spells and the dittany when you're out of her clutches, there should be no lasting damage." Harry watched as Snape succinctly demonstrated the second spell, then he repeated it a couple of times himself. "Good. Now, I will hold on to this," Snape said, brandishing the dittany, "and you will come here immediately after your final detention on Friday. Are we clear?" "Yes, sir." Harry didn't really see what the big deal was about leaving the wound until Friday. He wouldn't let it get infected or anything. "Good. Now go to bed. I won't have you falling asleep in your cauldron tomorrow." The poorly hidden concern warmed something in Harry's chest, and he bid the man good night. "Oh, and I have this for you," he added before he could forget, digging the 2-way mirror out of his pocket. "Could you get that back to Sirius, please?" "He'll have it by the weekend," Snape assured him. Harry grinned and then scurried from the professor's quarters, hurrying back up to Gryffindor Tower. He still had a dream diary and 6 inches on the proper handling of Bowtruckles to write before he could go to bed. In Thursday's detention, the words stopped healing entirely after around 3 hours, blood dripping slowly down the back of Harry's hand. The sight of it made Umbridge grin sharply. Harry was just glad it meant he was free. Before 9, instead of at midnight, Harry returned to the common room feeling utterly exhausted. He still had homework to tackle, with a glamour covering his hand to hide the obvious cut. His friends seemed surprised to see him back so early. "Maybe she's starting to get sick of you," Neville joked, and Harry managed a weak smile. He should be so lucky. Ginny, a 4th year with hardly a fraction of the homework the boys had, returned to the common room just before curfew. She was smiling, and if Harry wasn't mistaken, there was a love bite on her neck. His stomach twisted uneasily as he glanced at Neville. "Better not let your brothers see that," Harry warned her quietly, tapping his own neck for emphasis. She flushed as red as her hair. "Shit! I told him! Shit!" Her brown eyes darted guiltily to Neville. "I'm going to go." She hurried up to her dormitory before either of them could respond. Eventually Neville sighed. "It's fine," he said, though his voice sounded hollow. "She'd tell me if things had changed." Harry's heart clenched in sympathy, and he squeezed Neville's knee. "She'll come around," he hoped. Whatever. Neville's expression closed off, and he raised a privacy ward around them. We had a study group meeting while you were in detention, by the way. I passed on your notes. You should see the stack Susan has. It's almost as tall as she is. Harry listened intently as Neville recounted the events of the meeting. We're going to lay low for now. There's not much we can do yet, anyway. Even Cassius, his uncle, won't let him take the seat, even though he's 17. Harry grimaced. He'd only ever heard awful things about Lord Warrington. Is he, you know... Harry tapped his left forearm pointedly, and Neville shook his head. Not yet. After graduation, apparently, if he can't get out of it. I'll think of a way, Harry said firmly. He refused to let any of his friends be forced to bear the mark of that monster. He remembered Snape's words about how awful it was to have such a brand, and how much he regretted that decision. "How are the Slytherins?" Harry asked, noting how tightly the house had locked itself down, barely acknowledging anyone not wearing green and silver. Neville replied, "Blaise is keeping an ear out for anyone looking to escape the dark. The others are too, but I guess Blaise is the main one for it. I'm not sure. There was a lot of Slytherin double talk that I didn't really get, but Malfoy mentioned they had the in-house situation covered. We just know not to expect any of them at larger study groups." "That's a shame, but it's inevitable," Harry said. "Hopefully we can change things for the younger years, if not for our own." Neville grinned. "Parkinson said they've been telling the Firsties that it's a mark of Slytherin cunning to manipulate Ravenclaws and Hufflepuffs into helping with their homework," he shared with Harry. "It might not be the best way to start friendships, but, well..." "Slytherins," Harry nodded knowingly, as if that explained everything. Brilliant. He thought about how that young homework help would soon turn into casual conversations. They'd be genuine friends before they knew what hit them. Neville let out a huge yawn, blushing slightly. "Sorry, it's been a long week." "Tell me about it," Harry agreed emphatically. "You should go to bed. I'm going to be up for another hour or two finishing this, but at least one of us should get some sleep." He was determined to catch up on all his homework, not just what was due the next day. If he could get up to date now, he wouldn't have an even bigger load over the weekend. He could catch up on sleep then, and hopefully see his boyfriend. With a bit more convincing, Neville agreed to leave Harry to it, and drowsily stumbled off to the dormitory. Harry turned back to his homework, pouring all his focus into the task at hand. He refused to let Umbridge and her detestable detentions ruin the beginning of his 5th year. He was no stranger to exhaustion, yet he pressed on as Friday dragged by, grey and rainy, just like the rest of the week. But the end of the day was in sight, and that kept him motivated. Fortunately for the Gryffindors, the rain had cleared by 5 o'clock. From his seat at the desk in Umbridge's office, he could somewhat see the Quidditch pitch, not clearly enough to distinguish individual players, but he could spot the hopeful keepers flying. He kept a watchful eye on the proceedings whenever he was sure Umbridge wasn't looking his way. At this point he barely registered the pain in his hand, slipping into the same mindset that had helped him endure the endless chores at the Dursleys after a painful beating. Finally, the session ended. Umbridge surveyed her work, taking great satisfaction in the deep-cut words etched into his skin. As she examined it, Harry felt a sharp burn in his scar. He couldn't help but flinch at the sudden pain, which only seemed to widen Umbridge's smile. "Yes, I think I've made my point. You may go, Mr. Potter," she said. Harry didn't need to be told twice. He quickly made his way down to Snape's office, his mind lingering on the ache in his scar. What was Voldemort up to? His emotions didn't usually break through to him like that, especially while he maintained his occlumency shields. He pushed the thought aside. There was little he could do about it. Snape was waiting for him, directing him into a chair as he gathered the dittany and gauze, carefully tending to the cursed wound. "I would quite like to kill that woman," Snape said evenly, causing Harry to look up in surprise. "That makes two of us," Harry replied after a moment. "But I would also quite like to see her face when Susan and her aunt make Fudge regret even thinking about entering the world of politics, and when she gets undeniable proof that Voldemort is back." From the look on Snape's face, it seemed he would still find murder more satisfying. "I suppose with all these detentions you haven't had time to work on your studies from the summer," Snape remarked. Harry scoffed. "I barely had time to do my bloody homework. This first week back has really been ridiculous." Snape's lips twitched in amusement. "Bastard. I'm planning to spend some time on my animagus form on Sunday if I can. Wandless magic is getting a bit harder to practice in my dorm, especially now that I'm up to the bigger spells. And, well, I can hardly work on my dueling by myself, or the darker spells Snape had taught him for battle. The Dark Lord is being remarkably restrained for now," Snape said. "With luck, this will allow you to take a little more time with your training and get your classwork under control. Should things escalate, we will adjust as needed." Harry nodded, though part of him itched at having yet another part of his life that he could do nothing but wait through. Last year, with the Tri-Wizard tournament, everything had felt like it was moving so quickly. This year, he could already tell that fifth year was going to drag. Snape didn't keep him long, healing his hand and then watching as Harry cast a suitable glamour to mimic a scar. Afterwards, Harry made his way up to Gryffindor Tower, eager to see the results of the Quidditch tryouts. The team was gathered by the fire, and Angelina approached him with a dark-haired third-year girl that Harry vaguely recognized. "Harry, meet our new keeper," she introduced proudly. "This is Vicky Frobisher." "Nice to meet you," Harry said, shaking her hand. "Welcome to the team." He wondered which of the hopefuls she had been, whether he had seen her fly from Umbridge's office. Her return smile was a little shy. "Thanks. I'm really excited to be here." "Play with all of you." She shot a glance at Angelina before hurrying over to a small group of third years who were sipping butterbeer from who knows where. That's when Harry spotted Ron Weasley across the room, a storm cloud of a scowl on his face. Looking back at Angelina, he noticed her knowing expression. "He tried out," she said quietly. "He wasn't bad. I almost considered giving him the position. Vicky's involved in so many clubs and societies, I wasn't sure if she'd have enough time for the team. But honestly, his attitude isn't what this team needs, and Vicky flew better. I figured if I can handle you in detention half the time, I can manage her occasionally missing practice for Charms Club," she added with a wry smile. "I appreciate the assumption that I'll get more detentions," Harry replied, making her laugh. "Prove me wrong then," she challenged, sticking her tongue out playfully. "I'm sorry if it makes Ron even more upset with you, though. He thinks you and the twins poisoned me against him or something ridiculous. As if I'd listen to any of your opinions," she joked. The news didn't surprise Harry, but it still made him sigh. He's angry at me anyway. It can't get much worse. He had become quite skilled at avoiding Ron Weasley. And I really am sorry about missing tryouts. "It's fine," Angelina waved him off. "We have practice at 2 tomorrow, so you can make it up to me then." "Deal," Harry grinned at her. Then his gaze drifted longingly toward the dormitory staircase. If he could just go to bed now, it would be the first time all week he'd slept before midnight. Go on, you look knackered, Angelina said, giving him a gentle shove toward the stairs. I want you in top form tomorrow. Aye, Captain. Dean and Seamus were the only ones left in the room, and Seamus eyed Harry suspiciously. Harry chose to ignore him as he grabbed his belongings. Harry changed into his pajamas and headed to the bathroom, determined to take a long, relaxing shower before collapsing into bed. Chapter 51. Despite his desire for a restful weekend, Harry woke up at his usual time on Saturday morning. It was tempting to roll over and go back to sleep, but he didn't want to risk oversleeping and feeling groggy for the rest of the day. He promised himself an afternoon nap and dressed quietly so as not to disturb his still sleeping dorm mates. Grabbing his writing supplies, he made his way down to the common room. It felt nice to be around while everything was still quiet and calm. The first week back had been so hectic that he had almost forgotten what a peaceful Hogwarts felt like. Harry settled into his favourite armchair by the fire, laid out his parchment and ink, and began to write. Dear Bill and Charlie, I hope you don't mind me writing to both of you together. I just thought I'd check in and see how things are going back home. I hope all is well at Gringotts and the Dragon Reserve. The owl year has started off with a ridiculous amount of homework, and I hate you both for insisting it wouldn't be that bad. Of course, it would have been more manageable if the new DADA professor, Umbridge, if you haven't heard already, hadn't put me in detention until midnight every night this week. It's a new record for me, getting so many detentions this early in the term. All I did was question the logic of the Ministry, refusing to let us use spells in DADA class when we'll need them to pass our exams. I'm innocent, I tell you. Anyway, I'm all done with that, so hopefully it'll be a while before she finds a reason to give me more. She will find one eventually, though. As I'm sure you're aware, the Ministry isn't thrilled that I'm warning everyone about Voldemort. It means people might actually expect them to do something about it, instead of just pretending everything is fine. If either of you have any tips for surviving the homework situation, I'm all ears. All the rest of my extracurriculars are going fine. We have a new keeper, so Quidditch practice starts back up today, but I'm still busier than I expected, Harry thought, sighing as he signed off his letter. It's going to be a long year. Give everyone my love. He kept it vague enough to avoid raising any suspicions, should someone like Mrs. Weasley accidentally come across it. While he trusted the older Weasley brothers, he was well aware of how nosy certain members of the Order could be. His next letter took a bit longer to compose, even though it was shorter. Dear Fleur, how's the internship going? More importantly, how was your date with Bill the other week? He didn't tell me anything over the summer, just that you'd agreed to go out with him. I need details. Being back at school is keeping me busy. I'm sure you remember what fifth year is like. I'm glad the tournament was last year. If I'd had to deal with that on top of owl preparation, I would have exploded. I have no idea how you and Victor managed to do the tournament while juggling your newts. I know you're hoping for juicy Hogwarts gossip, but either it's too early in the year or I'm out of the loop. Other than the ongoing debate about whether I'm a lunatic thanks to the Prophet, nothing particularly interesting is happening. Our new Dada teacher is awful, but that's nothing new. At least this one is actually who she claims to be. Looking forward to hearing from you, Harry. He still felt a bit uncertain about his friendship with the French witch, and writing to her sometimes felt awkward. It had been much easier when she was at Hogwarts, where they could socialize as part of a group. They didn't know each other that well, even now, but the tournament had forged a bond that was different from friendship, especially with how it had ended. Now that she was Bill's girlfriend, Harry was eager to keep up their correspondence. Finally, he wrote his last letter of the bunch. Dear Victor, how are you doing? Your season has started now, right? What's it like being on a league team as well as the national one? I bet you're really busy with training. I have my first house Quidditch practice of the year later today, and I'm so excited to get back on my broom. I really want to try out that dive you mentioned in your last letter, though I'm not sure how my captain will feel about it. She already thinks I'm too reckless. I managed to figure out how to get the European Quidditch League commentary in English on my wireless, so I'll try to keep up with your matches. It'll be a nice break from the enormous amount of homework I have. What else have you been up to since I last wrote? Good luck in your next match, Harry. Again, that friendship was new and a little unsteady, but at least they had the common ground of Quidditch to fall back on. Victor was much more expressive on paper than he was in person. His dry sense of humor peeked through the more Harry got to know him. There wasn't anyone else outside of the castle he could think to write to. He'd speak to Sirius when Snape returned the mirror to him, and possibly Remus too, although Tonks had made him promise to write. Quickly, he scrawled out a short note to her, asking how things were going and only complaining a little about Umbridge. He wasn't sure what else to say. There was a lot she didn't know, and a lot he wasn't sure he could trust her with. But she was family of a sort, and Harry was happy to work on getting to know her. With 4 letters sealed and ready to send, Harry left the common room and made his way to the owlery. Hedwig was waiting for him, and he stroked her head gently as he attached the letters for the Weasley brothers and Tonks. They were likely to be delivered to the same place. She took off, and Harry quickly grabbed a couple of school owls for the letters to Fleur and Victor, choosing a stout-looking eagle owl for the trip all the way to Bulgaria. Just as he carried it to the window, the owlery door swung open. It was Cho, who stopped in surprise. "Oh, I didn't think anyone else would be up here this early," Cho said. "I wanted to get it out of the way," Harry replied with a shrug. Cho held a parcel in her hands, and Harry helped her secure it to the leg of a large brown owl. "It's my mum's birthday," she explained, a blush creeping onto her cheeks. "I should have sent it yesterday, actually, but I forgot until about 5 minutes ago. It's been a bit of a week." Harry hummed in sympathy. "Ooh, yeah, not as bad as yours, though," she added ruefully. "Are you all done with detentions now?" "For now," Harry confirmed. Cho's lips twisted into a scowl. "She's foul," she muttered. "The way she talks about what happened. The things she says about you, and Cedric, and Dumbledore. I hate her." "Try not to let her get to you," Harry advised. Cho snorted. "Bit rich coming from you." Harry ran a hand through his hair, not denying it. "Rather me than anyone else." For some reason, that made Cho's dark eyes soften with sadness. Just as she opened her mouth to say something, the door slammed open abruptly. "Aha!" Filch crowed in delight, pointing a gnarled finger at Harry. "There you are. I've had a tip-off that you're planning to place a massive order for dung bombs." Harry shared a bewildered look with Cho. "Says who?" "I have my sources," Filch scowled. "Whatever you're sending, hand it over." "Can't. I sent it already." The caretaker's expression turned thunderous. "What?" He scanned Harry suspiciously. "How do I know you aren't hiding it in your pockets?" Harry turned out the pockets of his jeans, revealing nothing more than a sweet wrapper. "I saw him send it," Cho declared, meeting Filch's gaze. "It didn't look like an order form, though, just a normal letter." Filch didn't seem convinced, but he left after muttering a half-hearted threat about blaming Harry for even the slightest hint of dung bomb. When he was gone, Cho shook her head. That was weird. She paused, her brow furrowing. "You weren't ordering dung bombs, were you?" "Of course not. I've got the twins for that." Cho giggled for a moment, but then her expression turned serious. "I reckon someone wants to read your mail," she remarked. A cold sensation trickled down Harry's spine. There was one person it would be assumed he was writing to, one person the Ministry wanted very much to get their hands on. "I think you might be right," he agreed grimly. He realized he needed to be a lot more careful with his post from now on. As Cho and Harry parted ways at the base of the owlery stairs, Harry wandered down to grab some breakfast, mentally planning out his day. He felt quite pleased to leave all the homework he'd been assigned the day before until Sunday. He congratulated himself for having completed the rest during the week, even if it meant sacrificing a few hours of sleep. His Saturday could be all about enjoyment, Quidditch, time with friends, and if he was lucky, an evening with Draco. Neville was sitting alone at the Gryffindor table, which made Harry frown. He scanned the room, and his eyes landed on a head of long red hair at the Ravenclaw table. Ginny was sitting with Michael Corner, which wasn't unusual, but they had their hands clasped on the tabletop. That was new. It also explained the morose expression on Neville's face. "You all right?" Harry asked, squeezing onto the bench beside him. Neville blinked and then followed Harry's gaze. "I'm fine," he said shortly. "They're dating now, officially." There was no need to ask who they were. Harry winced. "And how do you feel about that?" The smile Neville gave in return was almost painful to look at. "I'm fine, happy for them even." He stabbed viciously at the yolk of his fried egg, watching it ooze over his plate. "Right." Harry continued to watch him warily for a few moments. If Neville didn't want to talk about it, Harry would respect that. Harry wouldn't force him, but he couldn't help feeling frustrated. He didn't understand what Draco and the other person were doing. It was difficult for him to sit back and watch Draco date someone else, no matter how much he loved him or how many promises he'd made about coming back to Harry in the end. But of course, this was Neville, so he'd never voice any of that. He still hadn't quite figured out how to stand up for himself. With a sigh, Harry reached for the bacon, reminding himself that it wasn't his business. If they wanted his opinion, they would ask for it. "What are you up to today?" he asked, wishing Neville had chosen to sit on the other side of the table instead of directly facing the Ravenclaw table. "Meeting with Susan and the others after breakfast, if you're up for it," Neville replied, his eyebrows knitted together. "Sounds perfect." "Great, then I guess it's homework. Though Professor Sprout was telling me about a new delivery of hybrid venomous tentacular plants she just got. They sound really interesting. I might go down and take a look if she'll let me." Neville's expression brightened at the thought of spending time in the greenhouses, and Harry smiled. It was just the distraction Neville needed from Ginny. "I've got Quidditch practice at 2, so I suppose I'll do homework afterward." "How about I go to the greenhouses while you're at Quidditch, and then we can meet back up to do homework together?" "If you want to, that is." Neville sounded hesitant, and Harry wondered how long it would take for him to realize that, as Harry's best friend, of course he wanted to study together. "Sounds like a plan to me." Harry leaned in closer and dropped his voice. "I'll probably be out this evening, though, if you know what I mean." He hadn't checked with Draco yet, but he couldn't imagine his boyfriend objecting. Neville looked confused for a moment, then grinned as realization hit, wiggling his eyebrows. "All night?" he asked softly. Harry choked on his bacon. "No," he hissed, his face flushing bright red. We aren't there yet." He certainly wasn't going to discuss that with Neville, especially not in the middle of the Great Hall. "Just an hour or 2 after curfew, at most." As much as he cared for Draco, he was running low on sleep and didn't want to be out too late. Neville continued to smirk, but he held back any further comments. When they finished breakfast and headed to the empty classroom that Susan had told Neville about, Draco was already waiting for them. Harry smiled as he took a seat beside the blonde, hoping he wasn't blushing. "Morning?" "Morning, Scarhead," Draco replied, his tone hinting at fondness. Their knees bumped under the table, and Harry felt a piece of parchment brush against his fingertips. He quickly grabbed it and stuffed it into his pocket. Susan was the last to arrive, and she looked pleased to see everyone there. "Good. This won't take long. I know we've all got a mountain of homework." "You all have no idea," Cassius muttered ominously, tapping into all his seventh-year wisdom. Susan ignored him as she took her seat. "So, we're all agreed that Umbridge is a Ministry spy, yes?" she declared, prompting Harry to snort. "Got that part, yeah. I can't tell if she's here to keep an eye on me or Dumbledore, though." "Why can't it be both?" Daphne pointed out. "Fudge has always hated how Dumbledore runs this school like it's completely separate from the Ministry. He'll want to bring this place to heel, and you along with it." The very idea made them all grimace. A Ministry-approved Hogwarts would be incredibly dull. "Do we really need to worry that much?" Ernie asked, leaning back in his chair. "Every other defense professor that's had it out for Harry has ended up dead. No offense, of course," he added sheepishly. "Why don't we just let nature take its course?" Harry mused, unsure how to feel about his previous years being described in such a way. "The professors don't end up dead until the last few weeks of the year," Padma pointed out. "There's a lot of damage she can do before then." "Are you asking me to hurry it up?" Harry asked, his tone entirely deadpan. Draco snorted quietly beside him. "If you wouldn't mind," he drawled, his eyes flashing. "As long as she's here, we're at an impasse. Now that Fudge is interim Chief Warlock, he's going to be even more worried about losing control of the Wizengamot. Not that we can do much until we're of age, but if he gets even a hint that we're all planning to take our seats this early, well, he can't even be happy about Dumbledore losing his proxy seats, because they'll be going to you." "I agree with you, but that doesn't mean I'm going to kill Umbridge," Harry said mildly. "Shame," Draco replied in a similarly calm tone. "Sometimes I wonder what the rest of the school would think if they saw you two like this," Parvati said, shaking her head. "But I don't think any of them are ready for it." Harry and Draco shared an amused look. If only they could see how the two of them acted among family. "The point is," Susan said somewhat impatiently, "we can talk about the laws we want to change all we like, but without our family heads on board, we're useless. What we can do, however, is make the Ministry regret trying to interfere in our school." A stab of fear went through Harry at the thought of all his friends getting detentions with that awful Quill. "Surely if she's here to get Dumbledore out, we should leave her to it." "That certainly wouldn't hurt," Susan replied coldly. "But it's not just Dumbledore she wants out. It's anyone and anything that doesn't fit her standards. You know what her voting record is like, Harry. She'd ban anyone with an ounce of creature blood from the school. She said the most awful things about Professor Flitwick the other day," Anthony Goldstein said, his voice filled with anger on behalf of his housemaster. "He's the best charms master in the country, and she doesn't think he's fit to teach." "But what can we do?" Neville spoke up quietly from Harry's other side. "Realistically, what can we do that won't make everything worse? She's already shown she's willing to give detention to anyone who stands up to her." "We don't all need to be quite so brazen as Potter," Millicent Bulstrode drawled. "Umbridge is a control freak. She wants order. All we have to do is make her realize it's a lot harder to control a castle full of teenagers than she seems to think." A smirk slid across her features. "Socializing with other houses, running in the corridors, messy uniforms, late homework. We can behave for all the teachers except her. If enough of us do it, she won't be able to put all of us in detention." "Of course, when Millie says we, she means you," Pansy piped up. It's not worth the risk of our parents finding out if we join in this rebellion." They all knew the Death Eaters were trying their best to infiltrate the Ministry and win favor with Fudge, so their families couldn't be seen opposing Umbridge's authority. "We'll hide in plain sight," Padma agreed. "We'll keep up our study groups and make sure it doesn't look like the Wizengamot heirs are banding together, be so obvious that she can't possibly think something is wrong. And if she tries to restrict things, well, we've already had plenty of experience reading laws and regulations in search of loopholes, thanks to Susan's little summer project." The smile that crossed her face was positively devious in its innocence. "We'll follow her word to the letter. If it makes the Ministry angrier at Dumbledore, all the better," Parvati chimed in, echoing her twin's enthusiasm. Susan hummed thoughtfully. "I'm talking. I talked to Aunt Amelia about it, trying to find a way to get her removed. After what Harry said about her teaching qualifications, we're exploring if that can be used against her. It seems like Fudge pulled a lot of strings to get her where she is." Harry didn't doubt that, especially if Fudge had condoned the Blood Quill. Suddenly, he recalled his encounter with Filch and frowned. "Be careful what you put in writing," he warned. "Filch tried to read my mail this morning. He claimed he was told I was ordering a bunch of dung bombs. I had already sent it off, but if Umbridge was the one who sent him, she might not just be after my letters. He could be putting Sirius at risk, or she might just be looking for more information to use against him. He didn't want to take the chance that she could go after someone else, too." The others looked horrified at the thought, promising to be cautious. "So we just wait until she makes her move, and then the chaos begins?" Cassius asked. "Normal students until our freedom is threatened?" Harry considered the idea, a grin slowly spreading across his face. Millicent was right. Hogwarts was a massive castle, and Umbridge would soon learn that she couldn't possibly control all of it. By the time Harry made it down to the Quidditch pitch, he was practically skipping, his firebolt slung over his shoulder. His whole body buzzed with the need to get in the air. The month at Grimmauld was the longest he had gone without flying since the summer before his 3rd year. He arrived before the rest of the team and entertained himself by flying laps, getting progressively faster and turning tighter until he was practically doing a backflip to change direction. A sharp whistle caught his attention, and he looked down to see Angelina and the others standing in the middle of the pitch. He landed, a breathless grin on his face. "All warmed up?" Alicia teased, tossing the quaffle his way. "Captain!" "Let's spread out. We're passing," Harry called out, offering a jaunty salute as he sped off to the other end of the pitch. He positioned himself between Fred and their new keeper, who had a determined look on her face. As the quaffle made its rounds, Harry was pleased to see that Frobisher could handle it quite well. "I wanted to try out last year," she said, raising her voice so Harry could hear her despite the distance. He tossed the quaffle her way, impressed as she leaned back on her broom to catch it. "But there was that whole tournament thing. At least it gave me an extra year to practice." That whole tournament thing, as if she wasn't describing the most horrifying series of events in Harry's young life. "Angelina mentioned you're involved in a lot of other clubs," he commented. He hadn't interacted much with any 3rd years before this. Half the time, he sort of forgot the younger students existed. Charms Club, Arithmancy Society, Debate Club, and last year some of the Ravenclaws in my year started a book club, but that's more informal, she replied, tossing the quaffle hard to Alicia. Harry was caught off guard when the ball came his way, but he managed to catch it with his fingertips and passed it on to George across the circle. "Blimey," he remarked, "I didn't even know half of those existed." Vicky laughed. "I guess you've always been a bit busy with other stuff." That was an understatement, if Harry had ever heard one. "My mum warned me about you, you know." Harry's heart sank, fearing he was in for another lecture about his sanity, like Seamus had given him. But then he realized the girl was grinning. "She said you were trouble, but at least you paid well for it." Abruptly, Harry understood why her name sounded so familiar. "Your mum is my lawyer," he said, his eyes widening at the connection. Vicky grinned wider and nodded. "Wow, I didn't realize she had a daughter at the school." No wonder she'd been so familiar. Vicky was eager to get Skeeter off Hogwarts grounds. "I'll tell her you say hi," she replied with a grin. "Please do, though I hope she won't be offended when I say, 'I really hope I don't need a lawyer this year,'" Harry said. And that made her laugh so hard that she almost missed the quaffle. With a quick dive and a barrel roll, she secured the ball. "Right, I think that's enough of a warm-up," Angelina announced, looking pleased with her choice of keeper. "Fred, George, grab your bats and let the bludgers out. We're going to put the newbie through her paces." Harry glanced at Vicky, wondering if she would get nervous. On the contrary, she looked excited by the challenge. She shot off to hover in front of the goal hoops, braced for impact, showing no hesitation whatsoever. Suddenly, Harry felt very optimistic about their chances for the cup this year. The Quidditch team played right up until dinner time, and they would have continued even longer if they weren't so hungry. It felt great to be back in the air. While Harry wasn't as involved in the main plays as the Seeker, he could see that Vicky was going to fit in just fine. They didn't get the snitch out. Angelina had complete faith in Harry's ability to catch it and wanted him focused more on the team. So his job was to be as annoying as possible, trying to distract and disrupt the chasers and the keeper. It was fun, and he was beaming as he walked with George toward the castle. Fred had stayed back in the changing rooms with Angelina, and Harry and George had no intention of waiting for them. "You doing all right, kid?" George asked, slinging an arm around Harry's shoulders. Harry leaned into him, still smiling. "Better now that I've flown." The redhead hummed knowingly. "I'll be even better after tonight." George wiggled his eyebrows. "Post-curfew plans, eh?" Harry blushed but nodded. "Catch me before you go. I've got some potions questions for you." "Will do. But don't expect any answers tonight," Harry said. "Of course not," George agreed, smirking. "He'll be too busy snogging your face off." Harry's silence spoke volumes. "Ron's not giving you too much trouble, is he?" George asked. Harry shook his head. "Actually, he's left me alone more than I expected. I'm not sure if he's just given up trying to do what Dumbledore wants, or if Dumbledore thinks I'm having some kind of teenage angst rebellion and will come crawling back in a month or two. But other than a few remarks, they've both been fine." Hermione seemed to take it as a personal offence that Harry was excelling in classes. He had been the only one, besides her, to complete the vanishing spell, and he'd even beaten her in charms. From what he could tell, she had been studying more diligently than usual. "Glad to hear it," George said. "I live in hope that a bit of time alone will help him get his head out of his arse, but he might just be a lost cause." Harry frowned. It had to be hard watching your little brother act like that. "Lots of people are idiots when they're 15, he replied. "Maybe he'll come around eventually." "Maybe. Until then, we've got plenty of products to test on him." George smirked mischievously. "Business is booming, and it's all thanks to you." "You two are the ones with the brains," Harry insisted. "I just invested in talent." That comment actually brought a blush to George's freckled face, and he ruffled Harry's hair. "We owe you, big time." "No, you don't," Harry waved him off. "You're family." George pulled him closer and planted a loud kiss on his cheek. Harry groaned, dramatically wiping at the slobber mark. "Go pester Lee," he mock-grumbled, as he turned toward the doorway to the great hall. George laughed, but obediently disappeared. As Harry headed to his table, Harry couldn't help but glance across the room toward the Slytherin table, where Draco was holding court among a group of 5th and 6th year Slytherins. His hair was tousled, and the sleeves of his dark green button-down were rolled up to his elbows. Harry nearly tripped over his own feet, his eyes fixated on the curve of Draco's wrist and the line of his forearm. A blush crept onto his cheeks as he tore his gaze away, heat flooding his veins. The note Draco had slipped him during the heirs' meeting had asked to meet at 8. Those 3 hours were going to drag on forever. Sitting in the unused classroom Draco had chosen, Harry watched the little dot labelled Draco Malfoy on the Marauder's map as it steadily made its way up from the dungeons. He had already checked that the coast was clear. Umbridge was in what Harry assumed was her personal quarters, and the only teacher on evening patrol was Sprout, who was 2 floors up. There were prefects out, but Draco was one of them. Harry wasn't worried about him getting caught. He put the map away when the dot reached the corridor outside and grinned as the door slid open. Draco immediately locked and warded it with his wand, while Harry jumped to his feet. "Merlin, I've been waiting all day for this," he declared, pulling Draco into a kiss. Draco's hands found their way to Harry's hips, steadying him. "It's been far too long," the Slytherin agreed, a soft smile gracing his lips. "I'm glad I had that mirror of yours for the last half of summer. I don't know what I would have done without it." Harry tensed at the reminder of the guests in Draco's home, pulling his boyfriend closer. With a few cushioning charms, they settled comfortably in the back corner, Harry leaning against the wall, while Draco nestled against his chest. "Can you stay at the school over Christmas?" Harry asked, intertwining his fingers with Draco's. "Probably. Even Father will agree that the atmosphere at home isn't really conducive to studying. And of course, I need to do well on my owls or I'll disgrace the family name." The bitterness in Draco's tone made Harry frown as he leaned in to kiss his temple. "You're going to do better on your owls than your father could even dream of," Harry insisted. "I hope so," Draco sighed. "I suppose you'll be spending Yule break with Sirius?" "Maybe. I rarely get to decide these things." Harry thought about the possibility of returning to Grimmauld for the holidays, but that depended on whether the Weasleys were going too, and if Dumbledore wasn't upset with him by then. "I wish we could all spend it at Serendue." The idea of a family Christmas, a proper one, in their real home, with Draco and his mother there too, made Harry's chest clench painfully. "We will one day," Harry said with a sigh, squeezing Draco's hand before raising it to his lips. He pressed a kiss to the side of Draco's wrist, the sight of which had been so distracting at dinner. "What?" Draco remarked, looking up in confusion. Harry just smiled. "I like your wrists, your arms," he said, trailing his fingers up the silk-soft skin of Draco's forearm. "This whole sleeves rolled-up thing is a good look for you." Draco smirked, and before Harry knew it, his boyfriend was sitting up, straddling his lap. "You like me looking all disheveled, do you?" A wicked light sparkled in his eyes. Harry hummed, resting his hands on Draco's waist. "Yeah, but it's better when I know I'm the one who made you that way." They kissed, their lips parting eagerly. Even though Harry could feel the heat between them, he felt no pressure to rush into anything. His mind flashed back to their conversation on his birthday. They had plenty of time to figure things out. Though he wouldn't mind seeing Draco without his shirt again. Tentatively, he set his fingers on the first button of Draco's shirt. Draco toyed with his shirt before popping it open. His eyes were filled with desire as he broke the kiss, both hands tangled in Harry's hair. "Go on," he urged, leaning in for another kiss. A soft moan escaped Harry's throat. With that encouragement, he slowly undid the rest of the buttons, pushing the soft fabric off Draco's shoulders to reveal endless, creamy skin. Harry's breath caught at the sight, and as Draco pulled his arms from the sleeves, Harry ran a hand over the blonde's shoulder. There was more muscle there than he remembered, though Draco's lithe frame was deceptive. His body was starting to look less like a teenager's and more like a man's. "You're so gorgeous," Harry murmured in awe, watching the blush spread down Draco's neck and chest. For someone who exuded such confidence, Draco still struggled to accept a sincere compliment. "Says the boy with annoyingly perfect abs," he retorted breathlessly, tugging at Harry's t-shirt to reveal the abs in question. It was Harry's turn to blush. He had spent so much of his life not thinking about how his body looked, painfully aware of how scrawny and awkward he was. Now that Snape's nutrient potions had corrected the damage done by the Dursleys, Harry wasn't used to having a body he could be proud of, a body that others admired, as long as they didn't see the scars. He didn't resist as Draco pulled his shirt over his head, setting his glasses aside when they tangled in the fabric. "Salazar," Draco sighed, leaning back against Harry's thighs to take in the sight. "Not a hint of that weedy little third year I started fancying, is there?" Harry grinned, stealing a kiss, their skins sparking with electricity as they pressed closer together. "Do you still fancy me then?" he asked teasingly, arching his neck as Draco leaned down to kiss him. Draco leaned in closer, his lips brushing against Harry's shoulder. A bit, yeah," he murmured, sucking a dark bruise on Harry's collarbone, a spot safely hidden beneath his uniform. "That's good," Harry sighed, feeling the warmth spread through him. "I fancy you too, a bit." He pressed his back against the cold stone wall as Draco shifted, finding a better angle to attack Harry's neck. It felt like the most glorious torture, and Harry wished it would never end. "I'm glad half the school thinks you're a lunatic," Draco said, pulling back for a moment to admire his handiwork. Harry raised an amused eyebrow. "Means they're too busy calling you crazy to realize how incredibly hot you got over the summer. I'll be hexing people left and right once they finally figure it out." Harry ducked his head, trying to hide his blush, and kissed Draco's sternum. "Doubt it," he muttered. He thought Draco was only saying that because he was his boyfriend. Compared to someone like Blaise or Justin Finch-Fletchley, or even Draco himself, he felt positively plain. There were plenty of other boys in their year for people to swoon over. "I know you're half blind without those glasses, Potter, but surely even you can see it," Draco teased softly, his fingers sliding up Harry's chest. "I don't, but I'll take your word for it," Harry replied. "As long as you think I'm hot, that's all that matters to me." He didn't want anyone else looking at him like that, not when he had Draco. "Just don't come crying to me when all the bent boys in school start chasing after you," Draco joked, cupping Harry's chin to kiss him deeper. "I'll be too busy cursing their dicks to fall off." That startled a laugh out of Harry, and he shook his head, grinning up at his ridiculous boyfriend. God, he was so in love. Maybe he'd tell him that one day soon. Chapter 52. After a wonderful weekend, Harry was smiling as he made his way to breakfast on Monday. He had played Quidditch, shared a passionate moment with his boyfriend, finished all his homework, and finally spoken to Sirius. His godfather had the mirror back, and Harry felt content knowing Sirius was doing okay on his own. Apparently, Mr. and Mrs. Weasley had returned to the Burrow now that the kids were back in school, making it easier for Sirius to spend more time at Serendue. However, Harry's good mood vanished the moment he saw the front page of the Daily Prophet. Susan intercepted him on his way to the Gryffindor table, redirecting him to Hufflepuff instead. As soon as he sat down, she thrust the newspaper in his direction. Reading the headline made his heart sink. Oh, she didn't. She did. Susan's glare was intense enough that Harry half expected the paper to burst into flames. Umbridge had appointed herself as the Hogwarts High Inquisitor. As Harry continued reading the article, he realized this essentially meant she could create any school rules she wanted and decide which teachers were deemed suitable for their positions. "Look," Susan urged, pointing to the very end of the article. "Wizengamot elders Griselda Marchbanks and Tiberius Ogden have resigned in protest." "Resigned?" Harry echoed quietly. "What does that even mean? How could someone resign from a hereditary seat?" "They've given their seats to Dumbledore by proxy," Susan explained, a sour look on her face, "as a gesture of support." Harry's stomach twisted. While he was all for standing up to the Ministry, he didn't want Dumbledore to gain more power in the process. "Great," he said, feeling the weight of the situation. That was 2 more seats they would have to try to wrestle away from Dumbledore's control. Even worse, they were 2 seats for which they were currently unaware of the heirs. "Marchbanks is the Tremblay seat, right?" he asked, and Susan nodded. Tremblay and Ogden were both lines that had not made any public record of their family trees in a long time. The century. Neither Marchbanks nor Ogden had any known children, and both were quite elderly. If anything were to happen to them while Dumbledore held their seats, it would be nearly impossible to reclaim them from the headmaster. "Mr. Potter," Harry straightened up, turning to see Umbridge standing in front of him, her eyes cold. Her gaze flicked down to the paper in his hand for a moment, and a tiny, smug smile crossed her lips. Harry couldn't stand her. "Might I ask what you're doing?" "Having breakfast," Harry replied, confused. Her smile tightened. "This is the Hufflepuff table. You are a Gryffindor." Oh, it felt just like Dumbledore all over again, students scattered at the wrong house tables, and yet somehow Harry was the problem. "Susan and I were discussing the latest articles in the Prophet. The Ministry does approve of students taking an interest in current events, I hope." Beside him, Susan sat still as a statue, her eyes locked on Umbridge as they narrowed. 10 points from Gryffindor, Mr. Potter," she declared sweetly. "Back to your table, please." Susan placed a discreet hand on his arm before he could argue, shooting him a warning look with the slightest shake of her head. Harry sighed, holding back his frustration. "Yes, Professor." He returned Susan's paper and got to his feet, heading over to sit with Neville at the Gryffindor table. He was scowling by the time he sat down. "I hate that woman," he muttered. Neville hummed in agreement. "Brace yourself. She'll only get worse from here," he warned sadly. Harry clenched his jaw. If she wanted to play games, he could play too. After all, he had half the students of Hogwarts on his side. Another Hell Monday began, thankfully without Umbridge's interference in history of magic. In that class, Harry sat at the back with Susan, mostly observing as her anger grew about the whole situation. When he wrote her a note asking if she had her, Harry was tempted to unleash his anger during potions class, but he knew better than to push Snape too far. If anyone noticed that Snape was being even slightly more lenient with him than usual, it would raise questions. As it stood, he had received a glaring red D on his Moonstone essay, despite knowing it was at least A quality, if not E. He grumbled about the grade for show, making a few sarcastic remarks that cost him points with the stern professor. But Harry wasn't worried. He was doing well in his other classes and could easily make those points back. He had hoped that divination might provide a break from his bad mood. Parvati and Lavender had promised to help him with his dream diary, but that hope deflated quickly when the trapdoor opened just as Professor Trelawney began handing out copies of The Dream Oracle. A familiar, squat figure emerged. "Good afternoon, Professor Trelawney," Umbridge greeted cheerfully. Beside Harry, Lavender gripped her quill so tightly that it snapped, ink splattering onto the tablecloth. Parvati was trembling with rage. Harry quickly vanished the mess before either teacher could notice. "Easy," he whispered to the girls, keeping an eye on Umbridge as she took her place at the front of the class, clipboard in hand. Professor Trelawney wasn't one of Harry's favourite teachers. After all, she was the seer who had made the prophecy that led to his parents' deaths. He would have been perfectly happy to never see her again. Yet he felt a flicker of sympathy for her as she stood under Umbridge's scrutiny. It was clear that Umbridge dismissed divination as nonsense and viewed Trelawney as a fraud. If looks could kill, Umbridge would have been dead twice over from the glares Parvati and Lavender were sending her way. The two girls had nearly abandoned their dream interpretation, shamelessly eavesdropping as Umbridge harassed Trelawney. "That's not how the sight works, you hag," Lavender whispered venomously. With trembling hands and eyes wider than usual behind her glasses, Trelawney stuttered her familiar prediction. Grave danger. Honestly, considering Umbridge was a defense against the dark arts teacher at Hogwarts, that assessment wasn't too far off the mark. Especially if she continued in the same condescending manner. Lavender Brown might just murder the woman herself. Harry was only half surprised when Trelawney approached him, snatching up his dream diary to begin her interpretations. Naturally, each one foretold a gruesome and painful death. After every prediction, Trelawney's eyes flickered hopefully toward Umbridge, as if she believed that predicting the demise of the student she detested most would earn her some favor. Harry couldn't fault her for trying, but sadly, it didn't seem to impress the toad-like woman. As the bell rang, Umbridge glared at Trelawney, promising to follow up with the results of her inspection soon. Then she daintily clambered down the ladder. Somehow, she still managed to beat them all back to her own classroom for their next lesson. Harry watched her closely, smirking when he noticed the telltale distortion of glamour magic around her cheeks and the slight heaving of her chest. Had she run all the way there just to be waiting at her desk, trying to look imposing? He hoped someone had seen her. The two Gryffindor girls were still fuming from divination, so Harry left them to it and took his usual seat beside Neville. It wasn't a surprise when Umbridge assigned them to read Chapter 2. It was also no shock when Hermione shot her hand into the air and announced that she had read the entire book and had opinions. She might be an annoying little spy for Dumbledore, but her dedication to learning in this instance was proving deeply entertaining for Harry, even as his anger at Umbridge grew with every word he read. "Foul woman's mouth," Umbridge sneered. "I am here to teach you using a ministry-approved method that does not invite students to give their opinion on matters about which they understand very little." She looked far too pleased with herself for shutting down a 16-year-old girl, more than any grown adult should be. Harry snorted quietly. After spending 2 summers with Remus Lupin, he was certain he understood far more about jinxes and their classification than both Umbridge and Hermione combined. But he held his tongue. He was trying to be good. "Your previous teachers may have allowed you more license, but as none of them, perhaps save Professor Quirrell, would have passed a ministry inspection, Professor Lupin has a mastery in defense, awarded by the International Society of Defensive Magics," Harry burst out, unable to contain himself. The slight against his beloved godfather was one insult too many for his already frayed temper. He was more qualified to teach this class than you'll ever be. Professor Quirrell, on the other hand, had Voldemort sticking out of the back of his head, but sure, maybe the Ministry would approve of that. Umbridge stared him down, her nostrils flaring with fury. Harry heard Neville let out a quiet, resigned, "Harry, no." But it was too late. "I think another week's detention would do you some good, Mr. Potter," Umbridge said, her voice dripping with disdain. Harry didn't flinch. It was worth it. As soon as they were free of the classroom, Neville hissed, "I can't believe you accuse the Ministry of being on you-know-whose side." "She was the one who said Quirrell would pass inspection," Harry retorted, frustration bubbling over. His friend shot him a deadpan look. Neither of them could pretend that was a valid excuse. "I couldn't just sit there and let her talk trash about Remus like that. You defending him is only going to make it worse, you know that." Harry was saved from having to reply when he spotted Hannah Abbott sidling up to Parvati ahead of them, whispering something in the girl's ear before hurrying down the corridor. As she passed, Hannah gave Harry and Neville a pointed look, followed by a tiny nod. "Right now?" Neville murmured. Hannah nodded again and continued walking. Harry heard Parvati mention to Lavender that she needed to go to the loo before dinner, promising to catch up with her later. He and Neville casually veered away from the stream of students heading toward the Great Hall. Harry led the way into a passageway that would take them just outside the classroom where Susan liked to meet. "This is the worst timing," he grumbled, checking his watch. He had to be in Umbridge's office by 5, but he wasn't going to skip the meeting. Umbridge had been High Inquisitor for only a day, and the atmosphere in the school had shifted dramatically. People were genuinely scared of her now, and Harry refused to tolerate it. The Hufflepuffs had gathered quickly, all looking disgruntled. "I can't be here long," Harry warned. "I have another detention with Umbridge at 5, and I really want to make sure I eat something. If I'm going to be shedding blood all night, I don't want to give her the satisfaction of watching me pass out." "Again?" Ernie asked, incredulous. "You need to learn to keep your mouth shut, Potter," Pansy drawled. "Though, out of curiosity, what did you mean about Quirrell having the Dark Lord on the back of his head?" All eyes turned to Harry, and he waved them off. "Long story. I'll tell you another time." Most of his end-of-year adventures had been a total mystery to the rest of the school. "What did you need us for, Susan?" "This whole High Inquisitor situation changes everything. I take it we've all had at least one inspected lesson." Everyone but Sullivan nodded. "Well, it's clear she's out for blood." "She was awful to Professor Trelawney," Parvati huffed. "Forget Trelawney," Cassius dismissed. "She pulled out a measuring tape on Flitwick." Harry sucked in a sharp breath. "How dare she?" Susan exclaimed, her frustration palpable. "Now that she has the power, she can add any rule she likes to the Hogwarts Charter, as long as Fudge signs off on it." She looked around at the grim-faced group. "We can't let it stop us, but we have to be careful." "You read the paper," Anthony chimed in. "She's here to get Dumbledore out. That's her main focus." "Yes, but she wants him gone because she thinks he gives students too much freedom," Susan shot back. "She'll do everything she can to curtail our freedoms just to provoke him." "Like actually using magic in classes," Padma muttered disdainfully. That reminded Harry of something Sirius had said in the mirror the night before. "I heard from a friend," he said hesitantly, "outside Hogwarts, that Fudge doesn't want us using magic in defense class because he thinks Dumbledore is training us to become his own personal army to take over the Ministry." At first it sounded like something straight out of the Quibbler, but Harry could see the weight of his words settle heavily in the minds of his fellow students. How in Merlin's name did we end up with such an absolute moron in charge of our country? Susan sighed in despair, resting her head in her hands. Harry grimaced in sympathy. Dumbledore running the school meant that people left it oblivious and complacent, and oblivious, complacent people naturally voted for oblivious, complacent leaders. No wonder it had been so easy for the darkness to thrive. "We're all going to fail our owls," Padma moaned, her voice trembling. "I'll never get into the warding academy without at least an E in defense." "Why don't you get Harry to teach you?" Blaise suggested quietly. When Harry looked at him, the tall boy was smirking. "In fact, why don't we all ask Harry to teach us? Not just how to pass our exams. Fudge might have trifle for brains, but becoming an army to take down the ministry sounds rather fun. Doesn't it?" Harry blinked incredulously. You want me to what?" "It's not a bad idea, actually," Hannah said, looking thoughtful. "I'm not training you all to storm the ministry," Harry protested. "How would he even go about that?" "No, that's my job," Susan replied with an aggressive grin. "But you've been saying since last year that the fight is coming, and now you know who's back. We ought to be prepared. We're all targets as heirs. We need to know how to defend ourselves." Harry could hardly believe what he was hearing. "I'm just a fifth year. I don't know anything." Sure, he'd been training with Snape, Remus and Sirius over the summers, but half of that wasn't anything he could teach students. "You face the Dark Lord more than anyone else who's still alive," Draco reminded him gently. His silver eyes were earnest as he locked gazes with Harry. "You know what it's like. The fact that you duelled him and lived last year." He trailed off, shaking his head. "You've always been the best at defense, and I know you. You know more combat spells than any other student in this school. I guarantee it." His lips curled into a challenging smirk. "If nothing else, think how peeved Granger will be when we all get better owl results than her." Harry snorted despite himself. That last point was very tempting. Susan was right, though he hated to admit it. They were all targets, and Voldemort had already proven that he didn't care whether someone was a student or not before he killed them. The idea of any of his friends being caught in a fight and unable to defend themselves when Harry had the chance to help, it made his stomach turn to lead. "Fine," he agreed. "But if we're doing this, it's not just us. We're not the only targets. Muggle-borns and half-bloods, he'll go after all of them. They need to be able to defend themselves too. The more people involved, the higher the chance of Umbridge finding out," Anthony warned, his voice tinged with doubt. "We'll only ask those we can trust. Half the school thinks I'm a lying madman anyway. They won't be interested. But it's a thought." He glanced at his watch and cursed under his breath. "I need to go. Think it over and get back to me. I'll brainstorm some ways to keep it all secret." He waved hastily over his shoulder to silence any protests and sprinted from the room. At least that would give them something other than Umbridge to talk about. By the time he reached the Great Hall, he barely had time to throw together a quick roast beef sandwich, which he scarfed down while speed-walking to Umbridge's office, doing his best not to choke. He arrived just in time, took a moment to compose himself, and walked into the office. As before, the desk with its lace doily held the Blood Quill and some parchment, and Umbridge sat at her own desk, a smile on her face that held a hint of malice. "You know what to do," she said, gesturing to the empty seat. Harry sat down and began to write. The moment he felt the sharp pain on the back of his hand, he let the glamour drop. It wouldn't do if the fake scar didn't reopen as Umbridge expected. It hadn't healed completely. Snape had warned him it would take weeks, even with the dittany, and the pain was worse than ever as the skin split open, blood welling up and dripping down his hand. He didn't flinch. He didn't falter. He didn't make a sound. Satisfaction burned within him. It had to be infuriating for Umbridge to watch him remain utterly unbothered by the torture she was inflicting. She had no idea that he'd spent his entire childhood being trained to endure pain without showing it. If he hadn't so much as sniffled when Vernon had sent him to school with 3 broken fingers at the age of 8, a little cut on the back of his hand wasn't going to break him now. Do it. Hours passed. Around 10 o'clock, Umbridge summoned him over, scrutinizing his hand. A frown crossed her lips. "Not quite as much of a permanent reminder as I'd hoped," she muttered. "No matter. By the end of this week, I'm sure we'll get there." With a saccharine smile, she dismissed him, and Harry strolled away with a sense of ease. It was only when he was alone that he used the spells Snape had taught him, cleaning the blood that had dried on his skin. Really, she was losing her touch already, letting him go just an hour after curfew. The loss of homework time felt more punishing than the pain could ever be. The next morning, Angelina caught up to him at breakfast, a worried look on her face. "George told me you got another week of detention." "I'm sorry," he replied, grimacing. "I just couldn't help yourself, could you?" she snapped, then softened a bit. "Harry, I know it's hard. I know she's got it out for you, but please, for my sake, can you try to keep a hold of your temper? We'll never win the Quidditch Cup if my star player is always in detention." Just then, McGonagall happened to be walking past the Gryffindor table. The grey-haired witch froze, turning on her heel to glare down at Harry. "Did I hear correctly?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "More detention, Potter?" "Another week with Professor Umbridge," he confirmed meekly. McGonagall's lips thinned. "After the conversation we had last week?" "She said unsavoury things about Professor Lupin," Harry defended, jutted his chin defiantly. Her expression softened for a moment, but quickly hardened again. "I think we both know that Professor Lupin would not want you to go to the trouble of arguing on his behalf," McGonagall said sharply, "especially against someone whose opinion he values so little." Harry couldn't help but grin. "Of course, Professor. It won't happen again." She was right, of course. Remus wouldn't want him wasting his breath on Umbridge. She was just so infuriating. "See that it doesn't," McGonagall replied tersely, before continuing on to the head table. Angelina looked taken aback by the exchange, perhaps surprised by McGonagall's quiet disregard for her fellow teacher. "Well," Angelina stuttered, frowning at Harry once more. "You're missing Thursday practice, but there'll be another one on Saturday. You're lucky I know how good you are, Potter." "I really am sorry," Angelina waved off his excuses, giving him one last stink-eye before heading back to sit with the twins. After his brief encounter with McGonagall at breakfast, Harry felt a quiet delight when he walked into Transfiguration later that morning and saw Umbridge settled in the corner of the classroom. McGonagall was greeting her students as if she were completely unaware of the intrusion. What followed was perhaps the most entertaining Transfiguration lesson of Harry's life. McGonagall was absolutely masterful in her curt, bone-dry responses to Umbridge's every interruption. Harry was impressed by her even temper, and even more impressed by the way she made Umbridge look as if she'd been slapped in the face multiple times. She took the time to list all her qualifications and accolades, of which there were many, and briefly caught Harry's eye as she did so, her gaze shining with well-hidden amusement. She had heard the specifics of his criticisms of Umbridge then. It was a beautiful sight. There was no teacher in the school more qualified, competent, or accomplished than Professor McGonagall, and even Umbridge knew it. Moreover, McGonagall had been both the Transfiguration teacher and head of Gryffindor for so long that there would be absolute outrage from the general public if the Ministry tried to oust her. Many former Gryffindors had gone into the Ministry. Jobs, after all, Umbridge said somewhat weakly, trying to assert her teaching prowess. You've certainly been at this for quite a while. One might even say, too long. She giggled girlishly. We wouldn't want standards to drop due to complacency, after all. A devious light flickered in her eyes. Perhaps a demonstration from one of your students, just to ensure you aren't losing your touch. McGonagall's nostrils flared. If you had been paying attention, you would have noticed that the students have all been practicing their spell work for the entirety of our conversation, Dolores, she replied sharply. Umbridge simply smiled wider. Then they won't mind doing it for me one more time. She turned to face the class, her gaze sliding right past Hermione, who confidently raised her hand. Harry knew what was coming long before she said it. Mr. Potter, perhaps? McGonagall shot him a look, and Harry allowed the barest hint of a smile to cross his lips. A year or two ago, this might have spelled disaster, but not now. Now Harry was quickly rising to the top of his class in most subjects, and Transfiguration was no exception. May I have a new mouse, please, Professor? He requested, embodying the model student. Lost your first one, Mr. Potter? Umbridge remarked snidely, but her comment went ignored. McGonagall fished a brand new mouse out of the box on her desk and set it down in front of Harry. There was a warning in her eyes, urging him not to let her down, but Harry wasn't fazed. He raised his wand, spoke the incantation clearly, and flicked his wrist. Instantly, the mouse vanished entirely. Very good, Potter. 5 points to Gryffindor, McGonagall said with a decisive nod. She turned back to Umbridge, whose face was once again taking on a shade reminiscent of Vernon Dursley. Does that satisfy your curiosity, Dolores? Umbridge let out a quiet huff and turned away. Harry returned to scrawling notes on her clipboard, completely focused until the bell rang. He couldn't decide what felt better, the absolute outrage on Umbridge's face at his competence as a wizard, or the indignant look on Hermione's. On her desk, next to the still wriggling tail of Ron's half-vanished mouse, sat a single mouse paw. On Friday night, Umbridge kept Harry in detention until 11:30. She seemed determined to inflict as much damage as possible before finally letting him go. This should do for now, she declared with satisfaction after inspecting his hand. I do hope you have finally learned your lesson, Mr. Potter. Harry simply nodded and wished her good night before heading down to the dungeons. To his surprise and trepidation, he found Snape was not alone in his quarters. I'm going to kill her, Remus growled, his eyes glowing bright with the wolf as he cradled Harry's injured hand in his own. How dare she harm my cub like this? Moony, I'm fine, Harry reassured him soothingly. This is nothing, really. He could tell it was going to scar, even with Snape's attention, but he figured it would just join the other scars on his body. He wondered what Umbridge would think if he showed her all the marks his uncle had left on him. If he told her she had something in common with Muggles, their methods were more effective after all, she'd better step up her game. It's not nothing. This is illegal, Remus argued. Snape placed a hand on his shoulder, and Remus slumped wearily. I don't want you getting any more detentions trying to defend me, Harry. I love that you're willing to fight for me, but she isn't worth it. It wasn't just for defending you, Harry said, trying not to squirm as Snape applied dittany to the bleeding wound. It was mostly for pointing out that Quirrell was possessed by Voldemort. Also not a worthy cause, Snape pointed out flatly. For Salazar's sake, Potter. Do us all a favour and learn to keep your mouth shut, Snape said sharply. If I'm in detention, she doesn't have time for anyone else, Harry retorted stubbornly. As far as he knew, Umbridge only had one Blood Quill. You are not responsible for the entire damn school, Snape hissed. How long will it take for us to knock out that senseless drivel Albus has been filling your head with? Please, cub, Remus interjected earnestly. I worry about you enough as it is, with Dumbledore so close to you. Don't give me another thing to go grey over. His attempt at humour fell flat, and guilt twisted in Harry's stomach. I hate her so much. She's putting so many people in danger with her ridiculous ministry-approved curriculum. But that isn't something you're going to fix by getting detention with her every night, Remus replied gently. When Snape pulled back from examining Harry's mostly healed hand, Remus swooped in for a hug. Let her do what she came here to do, make life difficult for Dumbledore. We all know it's temporary. As soon as the Dark Lord goes public again, Fudge and Umbridge will lose all credibility, and she'll be out on her arse. Harry pursed his lips. That's relying an awful lot on Voldemort to make a move. He eyed the adults suspiciously, his gaze dropping to Snape's forearm. What do you know that I don't? Very little, actually, Remus assured him. Just that Voldemort is clearly going after the prophecy. You saw what happened to Podmore in the paper, I assume. Imperious, Harry guessed, and Remus nodded. We think so. They're certainly trying hard to get into the Department of Mysteries. Luckily, the Unspeakables are one of the few genuinely competent departments out there. I wish my connection with him was more useful, Harry grumbled. I'm trying to block off my end the best I can, but with the dreams. I don't know if he's not holding meetings or if he's just purposely keeping me out of them, but all I'm getting from him is this endless corridor with a locked door. Snape's spine stiffened. May I take a look? Harry nodded, and their dark eyes met. He forced himself to relax as he felt the intrusion, pushing his dreams to the forefront of his thoughts. Snape didn't linger, and when Harry blinked away, the man was scowling. That's the Department of Mysteries, he confirmed. He's trying to get you curious. Does he think I'd have any better luck breaking in than he would? Harry muttered, rolling his eyes. At least now he understood why his dreams were so repetitive. Suddenly, his blood ran cold. If he's giving me these dreams on purpose, do you think he knows that I'm a Horcrux? Worse, did he know that Harry was aware of being a Horcrux? Snape's face was grave, but he shook his head. I doubt it. There is little to no information on a human vessel for a Horcrux. Furthermore, given what happened the night you got that scar, I doubt that splitting his soul was intentional. It's likely the magical backlash was enough to splinter off a piece, since it was already so fragile from the previous Horcrux rituals. He probably thinks it's just some magical residue from the failed killing curse. A grim smile crossed Snape's thin lips. I may not be privy to as many of his plans as Lucius Malfoy, but I am the one the Dark Lord comes to for difficult and obscure magical research. If he were looking into the possibility, I would know. Harry tried to find comfort in the confidence of Snape's tone, but he still felt cold. At least his hand didn't hurt so much anymore.